9 a.m., September 2nd, 31 BC. By the time the sun sets today, one man will emerge the most powerful on Earth. His enemy, his rival, will be condemned to lose both his soulmate and his life.
The plans were laid here that determined the course of the Western world.
Thrust ahead by a forest of oars, thousands of men hurtle forward to meet their destiny. Thousands of men and one legendary woman, Cleopatra. Her fate is bound forever to what will happen here off the shores of Greece in the next few dangerous hours.
It's a hard-fought, bitter struggle for absolute power and supremacy in Rome. And one man and one woman would win.
Order!
It is called the Battle of Actium. Ancient historical accounts detail a gigantic naval engagement that involved the lives of some 250,000 men. A showdown that shapes the course of Western civilization and changes the history of the world forever. The Battle of Actium. It's one of the most famous battles in history, and one of the most controversial. Skeptics say it never happened, that the ancient accounts are a web of lies and propaganda. Now, after over 2,000 years, one man is obsessed with separating out history's hard truth from beneath the smokescreen of centuries.
The problem is the battle occurred during a time of intense propaganda. And it was within the interests of the victor to present a story of the battle that conformed with the propaganda he had been giving out before the battle occurred.
In his search for solid evidence, Bill Murray at the University of South Florida resorts to an advanced scientific arsenal.
Back end of it, but that's okay.
From X-rays of ancient weapons to a large-scale map of the battle based on satellite imaging. It demands a new kind of research, part cutting-edge science, part dirt archaeology. But there's only one way to test his latest theory. He will have to travel to Greece, to an ancient site near where the Battle of Actium actually took place.
We hope to gain an understanding of an important event, and I hope to do it based upon verifiable, observable facts. In the end, it's this gigantic puzzle that is a lot of fun to put together.
Bill Murray believes the truth about Actium is embedded here, in this forgotten Roman monument built near the site of the battle. He is convinced that this stone facade holds the key to understanding the climactic struggle for control of the ancient world.
I came to the monument in 1978 for the first time, and when I looked at it, I knew that something special was there. It's just a pile of rocks, but it tells us so much.
In recent years, Dr. Konstantinos Zakos of the Greek Archaeological Service has directed a full-scale excavation of the site, uncovering thousands of fragments from the monument. He has invited Bill Murray to view his discoveries, convinced they reveal new insights into the battle.
We discovered more than 7,000 fragments, and still the excavation is in process.
For 2,000 years, the artifacts have been concealed from view, the details of the battle shrouded in controversy. But all sides agree on one thing. It began in Rome with a cold-blooded murder. The murder victim, Julius Caesar, ruler of the Roman world, the most powerful man on earth. Too powerful, many say. The elite in Rome fear he will become a despot, that he will set himself up as a god. But Julius Caesar is all too mortal. Even before the blood-soaked body of Caesar is cold, the power struggle begins. A favorite is Mark Antony, Caesar's most trusted general, a national hero, a ladies' man, a hard-drinking soldier.
Mark Antony was ruggedly handsome.
Professor Robert Gerval at UCLA has analyzed the ancient accounts.
Big, brave, strong, virile guy. His family claimed descent from the Greek god Hercules, and Antony liked to play the part.
Sometimes impulsive, always charismatic. To the men, he is one of their own.
If we're trying to find a modern comparison in the American political experience, I might choose a young Teddy Roosevelt or John F. Kennedy in terms of their popular appeal, their charisma, their sense of being a courageous leader, and honest.
Antony's competition is the adopted son of Caesar, Octavian, a pampered 20-year-old. Unlike Antony, he's no hero. He suffers from a nervous stomach, but he's a master of mind games.
I find him an extremely interesting man, and yet I don't think I would have liked him. He would have been a rather cold fish.
Shrewd and calculating where Antony is impulsive, he knows when to lie in wait and when to strike.
Octavian had a bad reputation before Actium in the ancient sources. He's described as ruthless, cruel, ambitious, and at the same time frail, sickly, effeminate, cowardly.
The only clue, perhaps, that he is destined for greatness? An unnerving gaze that chills his enemies. The two rivals, Octavian and Antony, split in half the Roman world that is Caesar's legacy. Octavian will take the west, Antony the east. As if to clinch the deal, Antony even marries Octavian's beautiful sister, Octavia. The precarious balance of power might have lasted. It might have, if in 40 BC, Antony hadn't met a woman like no other.
Cleopatra was a remarkable woman, unique. It's hard to think of any other woman in history or today that can compare with the Egyptian queen.
Cleopatra VII of the Ptolemy dynasty is not Egyptian at all. She is Macedonian, heir to the empire of Alexander the Great. The historian Plutarch relates how Antony meets Cleopatra on an official diplomatic mission.
The attraction of her person, joining with charm of her conversation and the character that attended all she said or did, was something bewitching.
Antony was reckless, acted on the spur of the moment, often honestly and with emotion. Cleopatra was more patient, calculating, and looking ahead. In some ways, she was much more like Octavian than she was like Antony.
If power is the ultimate aphrodisiac, then Cleopatra is irresistible. For she is the most powerful woman on earth. When Antony spends the winter of 40 BC with Cleopatra, Octavian suspects his rival has been seduced by her power. He realizes that together, Antony and Cleopatra pose a threat to his ambitions. Octavian's fears are more than justified. Bankrolled by his lover, Cleopatra, Antony builds a formidable armada.
Why is he building big ships? I have a suspicion that he is building them so that he can use them to attack cities in his attempt to wrest control of Italy from Octavian.
At the business end of Antony's massive dreadnoughts is an awesome piece of ancient engineering. A ram cast from as much as 3 tons of bronze.
Oh, that's heavy.
At the monument site, Dr. Zakos has found a bronze fragment he suspects may have come from the ram of one of Antony's ships that actually fought at Actium.
Wow. You're touching history here.
Exactly.
In the water, it would come toward you like this.
But while the tools of war are being assembled, the war of words is just as intense. With the skill of a modern-day spin doctor, Octavian masterminds propaganda to recast his rival as a decadent fool.
He posed with her for portrait paintings and statues, he representing Osiris or Dionysus, and she Selene or Isis. This, more than all else, made him seem to have been bewitched by her through some enchantment.
Antony was the first Roman to make a woman his partner. And she was a partner in his political ambitions, his military campaigns and strategies, and above all in his public image and identity.
To defend Cleopatra, Antony does his best to boost her image with his troops. He has special coins minted to give her a take-charge aura of sternness and authority. The goal of Antony's PR blitz is to inspire the grunts in the warships, who will risk their lives for a woman. 32 BC, Antony and Octavian are on a collision course. Cleopatra pressures Antony to divorce his wife Octavia, sister of Octavian.
What was the critical factor was Antony's stubborn refusal to give up and leave Cleopatra.
Soon, Octavian strikes back. He arrives at the Senate with a bombshell, what he claims is Antony's will.
He wanted to be buried in Egypt beside Cleopatra. This was giving up his Roman identity.
By reading the will, Octavian has turned Cleopatra into the woman Rome loves to hate. She is declared an enemy of the state. And so in the summer of 31 BC, a potent mixture of lust and lust for power has brought them here. At the Straits of Actium on the western coast of Greece, 2 titanic forces are coiled to strike. Murray is convinced that at the monument, clues to the real battle have been staring experts in the face for decades. Not the archaeological donut, but the hole instead. What Murray found was indeed a systematic pattern of large, oddly shaped holes.
I saw these nose-shaped cuttings, and I thought, there we are. That's the front of an ancient warship. If I'm right, it's cool.
Murray realizes these empty sockets once held Octavian's most prized trophies of the Actium battle. Bronze rams, the business ends of Antony and Cleopatra's warships.
This is a monster. It ought not be here.
Murray began to wonder if this monument was nothing less than an ancient trophy rack. But while Murray's theory was sound, it lacked one essential element, an actual ram from ancient times.
I knew it was important, and yet we didn't yet have a warship ram so that I could understand how the ship and the bow timbers and the ram all worked. I couldn't understand yet.
Only if a ram were found would Murray be able to discover the meaning of the monument and verify with hard evidence what really happened at Actium.
So what we're trying to do here is something called today experimental archaeology. We are taking the evidence that exists at this monument and we are trying to massage it as much as we can.
Ancient chronicles record that by September 1st, 31 BC, Antony's forces are bottled up in a narrow gulf. Blockading them, Octavian has cut off Antony's supply routes. His goal? To starve Antony into submission. Then, one night, From his vantage point high on a hill, Octavian sees a strange glow in the sky. Antony's fleet is so undermanned, he has taken desperate steps to keep his assets from falling into enemy hands. Antony is burning some of his own ships. But how many of Antony's ships survive? And what will happen when his remaining forces face off against Octavian's mighty fleet? September 2nd, 31 BC. The stage is set for a battle that has tantalized historians for centuries. A discovery off the coast of Israel 2,000 years later will finally allow archaeologists to assess the power of the forces arrayed at Actium. For the first time, a completely intact warship ram is pulled from the Bay of Athlete. This priceless find now rests in the National Maritime Museum in the city of Haifa.
I walk into the basement of the National Maritime Museum, and there I see this gigantic three-dimensional object. I noticed this very odd shape, and that odd shape I had seen somewhere else. And then I remembered, I had seen it at Nicopolis in 1978. At that time, it all snapped. I thought, aha, this ram is going to be able to help me to explain how those sockets at Augustus's monument actually worked.
Using this bronze Rosetta Stone, Murray can now go back to the monument and unlock its secrets. By analyzing the ram sockets, he can reveal the size of the ships and the true scale of the battle on that day 2,000 years ago. September 1st, 31 BC. Antony and Cleopatra's fleet is trapped inside the Gulf of Ambracia, his men encamped on the beach. Octavian's blockading naval forces are arrayed outside and camped nearby. What actually happened that day over 2,000 years ago remains clouded by controversy, distorted by time. The night before the battle, 140,000 of Antony and Cleopatra's men tough it out in their camp in a mosquito-infested marsh. Good luck tomorrow, boys. I'm gonna be in my motorhome.
They're camping down in this low marshy area. They get bit by mosquitoes. Some of them get malaria. They become lethargic. They feel terrible. All the while, they feel that somehow having this Cleopatra woman around is a bad idea.
To make things worse, they are haunted by an unnerving sight. The campfires of Octavian's soldiers, flickering just a few miles away. While Antony's men sit it out, their fate is caught in a tug-of-war between a handful of generals and a headstrong queen. Antony's generals resent Cleopatra to the man.
The very presence of a woman, of Cleopatra on the battlefield, was an outrage to most of Antony's generals. Cleopatra, however, had brought the ships, had brought the treasury that supplied most of the provisions for the soldiers.
The queen insists their best hope is to fight their way out of the Gulf. If they can preserve as much of their navy as possible, they'll survive to fight another day.
Antony's generals had urged him to retreat by land. According to the ancient sources, it was Cleopatra that insisted on a naval battle.
When Antony agrees with Cleopatra, the generals go ballistic. Can they smell defeat? Or do they just resent being commanded by a woman? For Octavian and his men, the mood is decidedly upbeat. More than 100,000 strong, they are rested, and they have confidence in the man upstairs. He may be coldly calculating, he may be a loner, but Octavian is nobody's fool, and tonight he gets a lucky break. In Octavian's tent, a secret guest has joined them. Dellius, one of Antony's most trusted generals, has defected, and he's brought with him all of Antony's battle plans. Octavian couldn't have asked for a better spy, at a better time. Fortified by an unexpected windfall of intelligence, Octavian personally assigns each of his generals his own mission in tomorrow's battle. With the information from the athlete ram in Israel, Bill Murray has his own intelligence windfall. It will allow him to calculate the size of Antony's ships by measuring the ram sockets in the monument.
I think what they did was they brought the ram up and sat it right in front of the wall. And then the stonemasons measured the back of the ram. They took its width and they transferred it to the wall. And then they cut in from the front using chisels. And you can see the chisel marks here. It's like...
Using the ram sockets, Murray could calculate not only the size of the ram itself, but also the relative mass of Antony and Cleopatra's mightiest dreadnoughts.
We've got half of the ram here in this block. So what we do is we just double it. So it means that the width of the ram is 140 centimeters, which means it's a big ram.
Just as exciting was the possibility that by calculating the size of Antony and Cleopatra's ships, the caliber of the Roman fleet that faced them could finally be estimated. The dimensions he arrives at are awesome. He suspects that the largest ships were rowed by over 600 men, ships as long as a Boeing 767 and twice as wide. Dawn, September 2nd, 31 BC. Like enormous predators, Octavian's warships stir to life.
To give you an idea of the scale, this ship, which we see here, it's 1.5 inches long, but in reality would have been about 150 feet in length. When we take 60 of these, which would have been in a squadron, and put them side by side, you can see how long they stretch. It gives you a real appreciation for the problems that would have faced the commanders on the morning of September 2nd.
Antony hopes to strike a stunning blow against his enemy, then catch the wind and get away back to Egypt. But his plan hinges on making it past the island of Lefkos before the wind dies.
If this is the end of the island that he has to get around, the problem for Antony and Cleopatra is this. They have to advance their ships from the entrance to the Gulf, which is here, out far enough toward the west so that when the sea breeze is blowing fully and they can raise their sails and turn southward, they miss the mass of the island of Lefkos that we see in the distance. Over there.
Antony's men start to row out of the Gulf towards Octavian's fleet. Arrayed in a semicircle, Octavian's forces cannot be avoided. One way or another, a battle is inevitable. Which side gains the advantage first rests firmly on the backs of 100,000 oarsmen. Who are these men? Forget the Hollywood movies. They aren't slaves shackled to their benches. They are free men. Treated as expert labor, they are paid well above the minimum wage, and soon they'll be worth every penny. Bill Murray explains to students in Athens the political muscle of the oarsmen at Actium.
Where you guys are sitting. They were the ones who voted in the assembly. They were the ones who decided what foreign policy there would be. And I mean, the rowers were the folks who called the shots in Athens. All right, here we go. Down, up, back.
Murray shows students who are more used to jet skis what it takes to pull their own weight on the big ships.
Down, up, back. Okay, you've gone 50 feet.
Thousands would serve on triremes, ancient warships used by both sides. But to this day, not a single one from the period has ever been discovered. Built according to ancient specifications, the next best thing was launched on the Mediterranean in 1993. To experts like Murray, it's a shrine to the past. Walking its decks and sitting below provides him an extraordinary opportunity to see and feel what it was like for the men to row into battle at Actium.
You got to remember that this is a trireme. As far as ships go, of the time of the Battle of Actium, it's a small ship. I'm sitting on a baby here. The biggest ships that were in the battle were much, much fatter, much, much broader. The vessel's not going to be as fast, and it's not going to be as maneuverable, but boy, is it going to be heavy. And you can get this in your mind's eye when you're sitting here, this complete feeling as when you're on a sailboat or when you're on a big ship and it's moving through the water. It's not just the sound, it's this entire feeling that comes into the center of your chest as the boat goes through the water.
As Antony and Cleopatra's naval forces move forward, something unforeseen happens. Octavian's forces back off. Even though his men are hungry and tired, Antony has no choice but to push them hard and press his pursuit. Like the pistons of a turbocharged engine, Antony's oarsmen shift into high gear. Relentlessly, Antony's fleet is closing the gap. His ships aren't within ramming distance, not yet. But both sides are close enough to bring out the big guns of ancient warfare. Its name in Greek means through the shield. The catapult. Accessorize the arrow with a metal ring and some rags, and they're even deadlier. Bill Murray believes that at Actium, another even more formidable kind of catapult was used to rain death from above.
These are tons and tons of stones that served as ancient artillery. This ball here that probably weighs about 12, 15 pounds came from a machine that would have weighed as much as 2 or 3 Cadillacs. These kind of balls here would be used against soldiers.
The worst damage this heavy artillery could inflict was psychological. The balls hit with such force, they could literally blow a man apart and strike terror into all those splattered with the victim's blood. Ancient accounts say the initial damage reports on both sides indicate the catapults have no decisive effect. Distance, 100 yards, and closing. Now it all comes down to the ultimate weapon of ancient times, the ram, to attack Octavian's ships. But Octavian is too shrewd to allow that to happen. Antony's rowers are starting to tire. Will they catch up with Octavian's ships in time to destroy his fleet? Or will they be wiped out by Octavian's forces? Mark Antony's forces struggle to row within ramming distance of Octavian's retreating fleet. With her 60 ships, Cleopatra is positioned behind Antony's right flank. She bides her time, ready to stay or flee, depending on the outcome of the next dangerous half hour. Octavian's propaganda machine will later accuse Cleopatra of sitting it out to avoid losing her ships. Murray doesn't see it that way.
Now, she's not bearing the brunt of the fighting in the front line, but In the terms of Hellenistic warfare, we know that that second line was a very, very important line because it kept the enemy from shooting through the gaps between the individual ships in the front lines. My conclusion is she played a very large part in this whole enterprise.
Cleopatra knows that the victory will be theirs if their fleet can catch Octavian's forces and smash them with the huge bronze rams on the front of their enormous ships. Murray believes he can unlock the age-old secrets of this formidable weapon, now that he has an ancient ram as his key to the puzzle.
This timber here explained for us how that ram works, because these are the pieces that transfer the shock of the terrible collision resulting from a ramming blow to the bottom timbers of the hull of the vessel. If these timbers don't do their job, the vessel will fail and everybody on board will die. This one's big. The ones from Actium would be 4 times this size and even larger. What we learned after examining the timbers was the fact that this monstrous piece acts as a big shock absorber. And that's the key right there, because when this weapon runs into an opposing ship, the shocks are transmitted down along this timber into the bottom planks that make up the vessel. So if the ramming timber and whales are this big for this weapon here, then the one that is on the largest ram at the Battle of Actium is this big.
Often weighing as much as 3 tons, each ram warhead is an extraordinary creation. But Murray didn't realize how extraordinary until he subjected it to in-depth analysis by X-ray. The results were astonishing.
We just marvel at what was accomplished 2,000 years ago, 2,300 years ago. When you cast something this big, you tend to get bubbles in the metal. And the process of controlling the cooling of the melt of the metal that goes into the ram is one that determines how sound the eventual piece of metal is.
The X-rays revealed the ram was ingeniously designed. The front of the ram, which bears the brunt of the impact, has no imperfections to give it maximum strength where it counts.
What you find is evidence for the technological superiority of the bronze founder. Not only were they making a very, very large weapon in a single pour, but they were getting a very, very high-grade quality of cast.
Scientists believe the ram functioned as the ship's warhead to inflict tremendous damage.
It's not easy to create a weapon like this. They had to have 30, 40, 50 furnaces arranged in a circle, we presume, and then time the opening of the gates so that the metal all came out at the same point and went into this cast. That's to make one ram. How about to make the 630 rams that are represented on the ships at the Battle of Actium? It gives us an understanding and appreciation for the kind of expertise that these people had and applied to their military. They were able to produce a casting grade that today we call aircraft grade in quality. It's efficient, it's well made, it's technologically superior, and it's beautiful.
Just how strong is the impact? Imagine a freight train hitting a brick wall at 100 miles per hour. Murray concludes that the ramming force of Antony's attack will be decisive, but Antony will have to catch them first, and ancient chronicles indicate that's exactly his problem. 2 p.m. Antony's men have had to row for almost 2 hours just to make contact with the enemy. Now, Antony's fleet has finally caught up with them, but his starving, depleted crews are tiring fast.
It is hot down here. Hundreds of bodies close together. You're sweating it. You're rowing 35 strokes a minute. And what comes out of your lungs is more hot, moist air. But you can only row at peak efficiency for a short period of time before you start to dehydrate. Pretty soon, you start to lose it.
Antony and Cleopatra's rowers are near exhaustion. And perhaps only now, when it is too late, do they realize that Octavian has patiently waited for this moment to hit them with everything he's got. Backing away from Antony's fleet, Octavian has done more than push Antony's rowers to the brink of exhaustion. He has lured them out into the open sea. Here, the widening gaps between Antony's ships will make them vulnerable to attack. Now it's time for Octavian's Roman marines to do battle. For the men who survived the catapult barrage, it's payback time. If the oarsmen are the muscle of the warship, these marines are its killing machines, each with his own deadly specialty. 4 p.m. Using his almost 2-to-1 advantage, Octavian's fleet assaults each of Antony's giant ships from the rear and sides. The Roman writer Plutarch described it this way.
There were always 3 or 4 vessels of Caesar's about one of Antony's, pressing them with spears, javelins, poles, which they flung among them. Antony's men using catapults also to pour down missiles from wooden towers.
As the enemy ships move within 100 yards of each other, the fierce barrage intensifies.
The idea is you want to cause as much fear and panic among the enemy as possible. So you want to shoot the guys on the deck. So as these ships are rowing faster and faster, and you hear the people urging on the oar crews, and the oars are splashing, splash, 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 and you've got these volleys of arrows, and projectiles, and stones going back and forth.
Octavian would never dare face one of Antony's massive rams head-on. But now he can ram them from the sides, where they're all too vulnerable. Octavian's rowers accelerate to ramming speed. Slowly, relentlessly, the ship builds momentum, and for those in its path, there is no escape.
Things buckle, things crack, there's sounds, people are screaming. And then they back up again, and then these guys who are throwing sling bullets and shooting arrows are lobbing things at one another at hundreds of miles an hour.
Now, Octavian orders his men to ready their grappling hooks. They climb aboard, like a siege force, reaching the walls of a fortress. A conflict that began with the clash of the mightiest ships of ancient times will end at the point of a sword. On the defensive against a confident enemy, Antony's Marines are a motley army of Greeks, Italians, and Syrians. They do not burn with the desire to save him. Their only common cause? Survival. 4:30 p.m. Cleopatra sees that the tide has turned against them. She orders a signal flag raised to alert her 60 ships. To add to her disgrace, her only way out is to sail right through the gap in the center of Antony's line.
The ancient sources and Octavian's propaganda claim it was feminine impatience and cowardice that prompted the queen. when the moment of battle was still undecided, to flee like a woman. But actually, this was probably what Antony had, in fact, devised as a strategy. That when the battle was engaged and the ships in conflict, Cleopatra, with her ships, with her treasury, would find the opening and would break free.
As Octavian's troops battled their way aboard some ships, they set others ablaze. The Greek historian Dio Cassius writes,
The fire spread to the encircling walls and descended into the hold. Some, and particularly the sailors, perished by the smoke before the flames so much as approached them, while others were roasted in the midst of it, as though in ovens.
Many of Antony's men choose to end their own lives. For them, as for the Romans, suicide in battle is an honorable death, and more merciful than being burned alive. Historian Dio Cassius reports.
Those alone found a death that was tolerable, who were killed by their fellows in return for the same service. For they not only had no tortures to endure, but when dead, had the burning ships for their funeral pyres.
5 p.m. Seeing that his forces are overwhelmed, Antony boards a smaller ship to escape. Some of Antony's burning fleet sink, their rams lost with them. But the Romans bring many more damaged ships back to shore. Murray believes that, as was the Roman custom, Octavian would have offered 10% of his captured ships to the god. Because there are 36 ram sockets, he has concluded that the total number of ships captured from Antony during the summer-long war was at least 360. And over a third, Murray believes, Octavian won in this sea battle. Surprisingly, these numbers are in fundamental agreement with long-disputed ancient accounts. While the exact extent of the battle remains a source of controversy, experts do agree that Antony's commitment to Cleopatra is unshaken. By 6 that evening, he joins her on her flagship. Historians report that the defeated Antony is inconsolable. He and Cleopatra must have shared the chilling awareness that their cause is lost, that now they are fighting for their lives. They chart a course back to Egypt, but nowhere will they be safe. Wherever they go, Octavian will come after them. And for Octavian, the Battle of Actium will not be won until he has hunted down Antony and Cleopatra and destroyed them. For a year after his victory at Actium, Octavian has marched across Africa and Asia, strengthening his grip over the eastern end of the empire.
One of Octavian's favorite sayings was festina lente, hasten slowly. And that's what Octavian did after Actium. By the time Octavian, almost a year after Actium, invaded Egypt, Antony and Cleopatra were alone.
August 1st, 30 BC, Octavian approaches the gates of Alexandria, the last stronghold of Antony and Cleopatra. Now, as the Romans tighten the noose around the city, Antony has his worst fears confirmed. When he gazes into the harbor, he sees his own rowers raise their oars in surrender to Octavian. Now, as even his own most loyal troops desert him, Antony takes refuge behind the walls of Alexandria.
Plutarch gives a story that Antony had a trusted slave called Eros. And Antony had asked Eros to take his sword and to drive it into his chest.
But it's one command Eros does not obey.
It is well done, Eros, said Antony. You show your master how to do what you had not the heart to do yourself.
But death does not come quickly. He chooses to die with Cleopatra. Plutarch describes the moment.
Those that were present say that nothing was ever more sad than this spectacle, to see Antony, covered all over with blood and just expiring, thus drawn up, still holding up his hands to her, and lifting up his body with the little force he had left.
Historians point to these ancient accounts of their final moments together as proof that their bond went deeper than power politics.
If Antony really didn't love Cleopatra, he surely fooled everyone in Rome and everyone in history. Anthony, at any time, could have repudiated the queen, removed her from power, returned to Rome, but he didn't.
Now, with Antony dead, Cleopatra is powerless. Octavian's soldiers imprison Cleopatra in her own palace. There she receives a surprise visitor, Octavian himself. He has come to meet the woman he has slandered as a harlot, and he will later write that even now, she is trying to seduce him. Or is that only propaganda too? Octavian wants her alive, as his prisoner. Even more precious than the rams he won at Actium, she will be his human trophy. Cleopatra plays for time to orchestrate her own suicide. Some experts believe that Cleopatra had already experimented with different poisons to find the most fast-acting and painless one. It was said that she used live prisoners as her guinea pigs to test the poison's toxic effects. This basket holds the instrument of death, which most ancient accounts say she chose, but not all agree.
Plutarch, who gives us the story of the basket of figs and the asp, admits that no one actually knows how Cleopatra died.
If Cleopatra does die from the asp, its venom is more than just a swift way to end it all. A symbol of the sun god, the snake holds a sacred meaning. She believes that death by its venom will make her a deity in the next world. Cleopatra is the last of the pharaohs. After she and Antony die, Octavian assumes the name Caesar Augustus and founds the Roman Empire.
Few Romans would have believed, would have imagined that this sickly young man would become the greatest of the Roman emperors, which he did.
The Battle of Actium becomes the foundation myth of the Roman Empire. To glorify his triumph, Emperor Augustus builds a city at the site of his battle camp. He names it Nicopolis, Victory City.
He was following here the tradition of Alexander the Great, who had founded victory cities throughout the East and his conquests.
The city is intended as a boost to the local economy and a perk for loyal veterans who fought for him against Antony. At the monument, ancient visitors could marvel at the rams of Antony and Cleopatra's ships, trophies displayed for all the world to see. Over the centuries, Caesar Augustus's victory city has crumbled, but the towering legacy of his victory changed the world.
It was a raised platform.
With Augustus, the first Roman emperor, we get a Western orientation. It's not coming out of East, it's not Alexandrian, it's not Greek, it's Latin, it looks toward Europe, and that sets up Western European history of which we are all the product. So you can say that the modern world evolves out of the events resulting from the Battle of Actium.
Ironically, the last great naval battle of ancient times brings the longest period of peace in history, 300 years. All of it from a single moment in time. Antony and Cleopatra and Octavian locked in the battle that changed history forever.